Deneen and I got a really cool invitation this past week to share some moments with new friends. The priest at Holy Cross and his wife and family, we met a few weeks ago at the Holy of Holies called Handles. It was a spiritual moment. But fortunately for me, as a Catholic priest, he was in garb, right? So black with a big old honking cross around his neck and all that was really cool. And so it's like, hey, I bet you minister someplace. So that's good, right? And so I introduced myself as the pastor at Covenant Church, and we had a moment to talk and share. And to my great delight, about 3 or 4 days later, I got an email from him that said, hey, my wife and I would love to have you come for dinner. And we were like, yeah, that's cool. That's great. They're new to the area, right? This is their first calling, young couple, young kids. And so we were delighted with that invitation. And so as we tried to work out a day, it came upon Monday, and he said, well, Monday's great, but I have this service that I do from 6 to 7. You're welcome to come to the service if you like, and then join us for dinner. And I was like, super, would love to come to the service. And so we packed it up, went to Holy Cross at 6 o'clock. There were 3 people in the congregation that night, Deneen, me, and one other lady. And if you're used to a Catholic process, right, it was a lot of call and response. So the priest leads and we respond. We had no clue what we were doing. But we were very grateful for the lady in front of us who tried to keep us on task in being able to do that. We had a lovely night experiencing a worship service, experiencing about an hour of lessons on the iconographic realities of their sanctuary, and then an amazing salmon dinner and time together. Before you knew it was 10:30, and we were still sitting there. We're going, it is way past these old people's bedtime. We have got to go. But one of the things that Father asked me before I left, he said, hey, what was your takeaway from service today? And I said, I had an anticipation of this coming in, but it certainly was true that what I experienced was more of the bigness of God than I'm used to in a service. More of the bigness of God. I learned quickly within that liturgy, right, that God is transcendent. He is large, and I am not, right? One of the easiest things to catch on, because it was repeated a number of times, was a triad of Lord have mercy, and there was a little tune to it, and we caught on to that. It's about the only thing we caught on to, but we caught on to that. But then it hit me later in the service when there was a Lord have mercy, and in parentheses after it was 40 times. 40 times we said, Lord have mercy. How big is God and how small we are as his people. And a healthy understanding of the bigness of God, a healthy understanding of the transcendence of God, is going to help us this morning as we consider the question of the week. Because hey, let's face it, Protestants, right? Most of the time we say, Lord, forgive me, and we think we're good for about a month, right? If I made you all sit here and say, Lord, have mercy 40 times, you'd go, Lord, have mercy for that pastor, because, right? I mean, we sang, great is thy faithfulness. Mercies are more new every morning, right? The reality of that, we're like, oh, I'm glad that's true, right? And we move on. And the reality of the bigness and the transcendence of God sometimes we don't get. But that transcendence, that bigness that we experienced on that night is going to help us this morning as we consider the question of the week. If you're just joining us this summer, we've been in a summer series asking good questions about faith and life and what does that mean for us. And this morning we want to look at the sometimes controversial question of whether God still heals today. Does God still heal today? Too often we get God and us, I'll speak for myself, God and me mixed up. We might question God's way because somehow his way is supposed to be in line with my way, right? We've had way too much Frank Sinatra. Some of you will get that, right? Right? So we first see our way, and then we anticipate that God's going to play along, right? And we get that mixed up. We love to tell God what God is going to do. maybe especially around the question of healing. Nicky Gumbel, a British Anglican priest and the author of Alpha, the series with which we get these questions from, says that before he was a Christian, he could never understand how a loving God might heal one person but not another. And it contributed to his mistrust and lack of belief in God. I don't know, maybe you can resonate with that this morning. But do you see how the thinking is faulty? Because it begins with man. It begins with what we think should be. It begins with what Nicky thought it should be. And it ends with God. But the Bible leads us to a very different place, a place that recognizes that God is far superior with a much greater understanding of the way things go. And he requires us to trust him for his ways in our lives, including our healing. And quite frankly, when we get it, we might just say, Lord, have mercy. So does God heal today? That's our question. And we consider it under the umbrella of believing that God is big and we are not. And we start with a quick survey of the scriptures to see that God, listen, is indeed a healer. He indeed is a healer. And we start with that in Exodus chapter 15, verse 26. I'm going to put it on the screen here in a moment, but if you'd like to go there, because I know some of you love to go into your word, that's great. And if you'd love to grab the Pew Bible, it's on page 57, 58 of your black Pew Bibles in front of you. But we're going to see a biblical survey of the reality that God is indeed a healer. And we start here in Exodus 15 because it declares that God's name is healer. And by virtue of his name being healer, we understand that his very nature is one who heals, right? So listen, healing is not just something that God does, it's who he is. God calls himself a healer here. The Hebrew is Jehovah Rapha, right? I am the Lord, your healer. Not just something that he does, it is something that he is. Healing is in his very nature. But you might find it interesting, and I'll get to that in just a second, you might find it interesting that the only place in the Bible where God identifies himself as a healer, he's actually not doing any kind of physical healing. Let me give you context to this verse. Rather, what God is doing is giving a picture of spiritual healing, more so than physical healing. That through a miraculous sign, he is giving a sense of salvation, more than he is just healing someone's physical body. Do you remember the whole Exodus story? Of course you do, right? So all of God's people are enslaved in Egypt, right? Been slaves there for 400 years. And God says, enough is enough, and through miraculous ways, right, all the way to the Passover, and the reality of the shed blood of the lamb over the doorframe of the house, that the people of God are able to leave Egypt. But upon leaving Egypt, they kind of walk in some circles. They get to the Red Sea, and all of a sudden they get to the Red Sea, and Egypt's behind them, the sea is in front of them, and miraculously, God opens the sea and they cross the Red Sea. You remember these stories, right? Maybe you also remember the story that just 3 days later, 3 days later after all that, right? They're in the wilderness going, oh, God, why did you bring us out here to do this? And they just start whining. Did you bring us out here to die? There's no water out here. And beyond that, how rude of you to bring us to water, but the water is bitter, and we can't even drink the water. And so Moses intercedes for them, says, God, what are you going to do? And Moses says this, see that log over there? I want you to take that log and throw it into the bitter water, and the bitter water becomes better. Sort of like Dr. Seuss, right? The bitter water becomes better. The water is cleansed and cleaned, and it becomes available for drinking. And it's in that context, right, that the Lord speaks Exodus 15:26 to his people. If you diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his eyes and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes. In other words, if you see God for who he is and you follow him, God says, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians. And then he says, Jehovah Rapha, for I am the Lord, your healer. See with me the beautiful picture here of healing. A lost and whining people with no hope receive the provision of clean, life-giving water through a log. You with me? They would not have known it then, sitting there, but sitting here in 2025, begin to put some of those pieces together. That it is the picture of the provision of the cross. It is the picture of the provision of our salvation for our whiny and hopeless souls. A cross that would make us clean, a cross that would give us life. And then God says, hey, keep following me, and I will continue to give you life, to make what is bitter better, to make what is bitter sweet, because I am the Lord your healer. Summary, quickly. A big brush summary of this story, but I think helpful for answering our question, does God still heal today? Because I want us to see the foundation of the healing. Does he still heal today? You bet he does. But the primary healing that he wants us to see, ready, is our spiritual healing, is our salvation, is our bitter becoming better, our bitter becoming sweet. How? Through the cross of Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, people of the church, there is no greater healing than that. So the foundation of God as a healer comes in our salvation, comes in him giving us life. Do you know this morning that healing? Because listen, as great as the question is, and the other things that we'll run after this morning, this is the question. Do you know? This is the life and death question. Do you know that healing? It would be what would be on the foremost on God's mind as we gather here. The bigness of God has provided a plan for you to be healed of the stain of sin. The big picture of God, the bigness, the transcendence of God from the beginning of time before he even created the earth was that indeed, Rick Stauffer, you would have a way through Christ that our bitter, that our sin, that our death would become better, would become sweet, would become life. And we are to trust him for that. So is that the only way that God heals in the Bible? No. But get this, all that follows from it is a temporal picture of the eternal healing that God has done through Jesus. So we're going to keep talking about, does God heal today? Because you're still scratching your head, you're like, well, so, can I pray that my arm gets better? Or can I pray that I don't have stomach issues? Am I allowed to do that? And the answer to that is yes. But you need to hear it under the banner with gratitude and thanksgiving of the reality that you're saved. He is a healer by nature. He is a healer by name, but he is a healer by practice. In the Old Testament, we see evidence that God indeed physically heals his people. Amazing stories. Maybe my favorite, at least it was this week, as I thought about all the ways in which God has done this, is in 1 Kings 17, where, if you remember Elijah, the prophet Elijah, is called by God to this widow, right, in the midst of a small town. She's caring for a small boy, and the reality is that she's just dirt poor, and she's literally on her last grain of flour, her last drop of oil. Elijah shows up and he goes, hey, can you make me some bread? And she goes, sure, but it'll be our last. He says, oh, don't worry about that. And God keeps reproducing. Remember the story? And they keep eating day after day after day after day. God just keeps providing oil and flour. They keep making bread. And so everybody's like, oh, that's pretty cool. All right, that's all right. Yay! Until the widow's son becomes deathly ill and indeed dies, which creates all kinds of confusion in this widow's mind, right? But Elijah, hearing the voice of God, goes to the widow's son, lays on him 3 times praying for him, and he raises from the dead. Imagine that testimony on Sunday morning. Astounding. Good news, right? God loves in his very nature to heal, and he does. But understand that even in that story, if we were to break it down and think about it, is that it points to Jesus and to our salvation. And also to realize that physical healing is not the only kind of healing that God does. Not just through physical healing, but also emotional healing. There's a repeated promise throughout the Scriptures that God desires to heal the brokenhearted. Maybe that resonates with you this morning. Realities in our culture, in our world of anxiety, depression, worry, broken hearts. Psalm 147, verse 3, Isaiah 61, verse 1. You can look at them. You can cross-reference them and find a dozen more that says that God indeed desires to heal the brokenhearted. So see it. God, who is a healer in his very nature, reveals that nature through physical means and emotional means. But remember, does it so that we might see, most importantly, the big picture of his spiritual healing of his people. And heck, if we turn to the New Testament, wow, we could have some fun there, couldn't we? We certainly see the evidence of God as a healer. In Luke chapter 4, verse 18, a major moment is Jesus begins his public ministry. Jesus stands in the synagogue, and they're not still sure who the heck he is, and he takes the scroll, and he opens it, and he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And everybody went, amen, that's a really great Old Testament text, until Jesus rolled it up, sat down, and he goes, but that's me. I've come to fulfill that. Whoa. "25% of the Gospels is the healing ministry of Jesus. Take way too long. Your roast would be way too overcooked if I went through every healing process. So here's summary. Matthew 4:23. "And he, Jesus, went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom." And what? Healing every disease and every affliction among the people. He's a healer in his nature and in his practice. Beyond this, Jesus empowers the apostles. Even the 72 to go and heal as well. In Luke chapter 10, verses 8 and 9, he says, "Whenever you enter a town that they receive you, eat what is set before you." And then this, imagine sitting there and Jesus telling you, heal the sick in it and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. So not only is Jesus healing, but now he's empowered the 72 to heal. And that was a glorious day when they all came back to report. And it keeps going. We see it in the book of Acts, the disciples. Now Jesus has ascended into heaven, sits at the right hand of God. But the disciples are empowered to heal as well. Amazing text. In Acts chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. They even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. And the people also gathered from the towns and around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits. And they were all, what? Healed. So listen, God in his very nature is a healer, and certainly in his practice is a healer. The Bible is stock full of evidence of it. But remember the bigger picture of God. That he does this so that we might see the truth of spiritual healing. It is a temporal picture of an eternal truth. And that is what gives us some help as we think about whether God actually heals today. Because some of you are sitting there going, okay, so yeah, Bible times, no duh, Pastor. It took you, 20 minutes to get that out? Of course he was a healer. But what about today? Is he still healing? And the answer to that is a definitive yes. He is Because it's not as if Jesus comes, dies, resurrects, goes to heaven, and God says, okay, let me change my nature. I'm no longer going to be a healer. It's not as if the plan of salvation is not still to be told in temporal pictures of the reality of healing, right? That when we see someone healed, or even in this context, hear of the story of someone, because many of you have told that story of being healed, that he wouldn't get glory and honor, and we might not have hope to the reality of his power and his might, but a power and might that is best exemplified in the reality of our salvation. So listen, he is still Jehovah Rapha. He is still working that out in very real ways. But listen, not primarily to make us better. Do you hear that? Not primarily to make us better. It's not as if God looks at us and goes, oh, poor Rick, I need to heal you. No, the only way in which, and for the purpose in which he might heal me, is so that he could display his glory and his honor. Our healing today is still a temporal benefit to an eternal truth. He continues to heal that we might continue to see his bigness and trust the bigger picture of our salvation. He continues to heal, as he did in the scriptures, for his glory, to lead people to the purpose of his coming, that they might see and know that he's come to seek and save the lost. But be careful, and here's a very brief cultural warning. God heals, not man. In fact, it is my belief from this pulpit that while Jesus gave authority to the apostles in the first century to heal, an authority that they could go and be healers, an extension of Jehovah Rapha, that calling, that authority has ceased. But God is still healing. The good news is that he's healing through all of you. The priesthood of all believers, to the reality that we can pray and someone, we don't have to run to the faith healer. We don't have to send $50 to get the hanky from the guy on TV so that we can put it on our head and somehow that's be good, right? No, listen, you can go to your elder, you can go to the person who's sitting next to you in the pew and ask them, oh, would you pray for my healing? And we say yes, because it's not us, it's not man, it is God who does this thing and continues to do this thing. Be careful. I'm not going to name names this morning. Although Mr. Tilton is the hanky guy, it's good to know. If you come across people that say they have the authority to heal, be careful. Too often in our culture, these are men, these are women who are seeking their own glory over the glory of God. Don't buy hankies. Be wary of individuals who want to place the focus on themselves over God. Even want to place the focus on your physical healing over the bigger picture of your spiritual healing. I hope that's clear. Does God still heal today? Absolutely. He is healing through advances in medicine. He is healing through natural remedies, things of the earth. He is healing supernaturally through prayer, but he is healing through his authority and for his glory to reveal the bigger picture of our salvation, a temporal picture of an eternal truth. He is healing to accomplish his purposes on earth as it is in heaven, awaiting a day yet to be determined when we are all healed. So listen, if you are sick, pray to be healed. Have someone else pray over you to be healed. Ask the elders to come and pray for you that you may be healed. God is still healing. But it does leave us with one final hard question. For some who sit here even this morning, Pastor, if he's still doing all that, like I'm into it. I'm amening as much in my heart as you can possibly hear, right? I'm good. But why is it that I haven't been healed? Why is it that my spouse, my friend, my neighbor, my brother, my sister, my child, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. Did God not hear? If God still heals, why hasn't he healed the person that I've prayed for? Why hasn't he healed me? It's a really good question. It's a really hard question. But I do return to the remainder and the reminder that God gets to be God. And we get to be grateful that even in the absence of temporal healing, hear that, even in the absence of temporal healing, we have the hope that we hold on to of eternal healing. Some of the greatest prayers for healing, including one who is near and dear to me that none of you got a chance to meet, and my dad, are people who had oil spread, prayers prayed, this, that, the other thing, and everything up and down, surgery, the whole deal. And he would ask his 2 preacher sons, why isn't God healing me? But he was one who would pray and pray and pray for your healing. And many were healed as a result of his prayers. Oh, this is so confusing. Why not me? Maybe the best help that I have for this question comes from a really unusual source this morning. As you know, I've said before, I do not wholeheartedly subscribe or endorse The Chosen, the movie show series that many of you love and see, and I cheer with you, right? It's all good. We just got to be careful. But I do think there are valuable moments in it, and in the clip I want to share today, I do think is biblically and practically helpful for this question of why not me. So 6 minutes, let's watch. I hope.
Master.
Little James.
May I have a moment?
Of course.
I am... Forgive me, I'm not always confident to speak.
Slow to speak. It's a very good quality.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Please?
So you're sending us out with the ability to heal the sick and lame. Yes, that is what you said.
Yes.
So you're telling me that I have the ability to heal. Forgive me, I just find that difficult to imagine with my condition, which you haven't healed.
Do you want to be healed?
Yes, of course, if that's possible.
I think you've seen enough to know it's possible.
Then why haven't you?
Because I trust you.
What?
Little James. Precious little James. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Because what I'm going to say defines your whole life to this point and will define the rest of your life. Do you understand? In the Father's will, I could heal you right now. And you'd have a good story to tell, yes?
Yes, that you do miracles.
And that's a good story. But there are already dozens who can tell that story. And there will be hundreds more, even thousands. But think of the story that you have, especially in this journey to come, if I don't heal you. To know how to proclaim that you still praise God in spite of this. To know how to focus on all that matters, so much more than the body. To show people that you can be patient with your suffering here on earth because you know you'll spend eternity with no suffering. Not everyone can understand that. How many people do you think the Father and I trust this with? Not many.
But the others, there's so much more.
So much more what?
I don't know. Stronger? Better at this?
James, I love you. But I don't want to hear that ever again.
I know how easy it is to say the Song of David, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. But it doesn't make this any easier. And in this group, it doesn't make me feel like any less of a burden.
A burden? First of all, it is far easier to deal with your slow walking than it is to deal with Simon's temper. Trust me. Are you fast? Do you look impressive when you walk? Maybe not. But these are things the Father doesn't care about. You are going to do more for me than most people ever dream. So many people need healing in order to believe in me. Or they need healing because their hearts are so sick. That doesn't apply to you. And many are healed or not healed because the Father in heaven has a plan for them which may be a mystery. And we remember what Job said. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. When you pass from this earth and you meet your Father in heaven, where Isaiah promises you will leap like a deer, your reward will be great. So hold on a little longer. And when you discover yourself finding true strength because of your weakness, and when you do great things in my name, in spite of this, the impact will last for generations. Do you understand?
Yes. Thank you, Master.
A man like you, healing others. Oh, what a sight. I can't wait to hear your stories when you return. Shalom, my son.
Shalom.
And James. Remember, you will be healed. It's only a matter of time. Shalom, my son.
Shalom. Master.
We don't need to see it again. Thanks. Yeah. Does God still heal? He does. But know that in doing so, or in not doing so, God is writing a greater story. That is Jehovah Rapha, the Lord our healer. He is working for his glory according to his plan. And listen, this morning, ultimately, we are just to trust him.